Okay, the last of the writers that I want to look at before we're done covering effectively character streams is going to be the PrintWriter. So a quick overview of what this presentation will contain. I'll give an introduction of PrintWriter. We'll look at the class declaration of PrintWriter, its constructors, its methods, and some sample code. So PrintWriter in Java is a character output stream. Anything that ends with a writer or reader, that's how we are able to identify quickly by its name, whether it's a character stream or a byte stream. And so this particular one is really designed to create a file and write output data to a text file in a human readable format. So it provides several methods to print strings and numbers in text format. And so the methods of PrintWriter never throw an IO exception when errors occur, but instead sets an internal flag. And we can check that flag by calling the check error method. So some quick notes for reading strings and numeric values from a text file, you can use the scanner class. And so for writing strings and numeric values to a text file, you can use the PrintWriter class. And so when we start talking about files in particular, we'll look at examples of each of those. We'll look at an example of PrintWriter here, but we'll look at an example of using scanner later. Okay, so in terms of class declaration, the PrintWriter class is a subclass of the writer class, which itself extends the object class. And it also implements the closable, the flushable, the appendable, and auto-closable interfaces. All of the writers do, right? That way they all have membership to those interfaces. So the general syntax to declare PrintWriter class, if we were to do this ourselves, would be public class PrintWriter. It's a concrete class. It extends the writer abstract class, and it implements those four interfaces. And just a special note that appendable is present in the java.lang package, not the java.io package. And it defines an object to which characters can be added by using the append method. So the inheritance hierarchy for PrintWriter would look like this. So we have our java.io PrintWriter, which extends java.io writer, which itself extends java.lang.object. And PrintWriter class was added ever since Java 1 came out. So it's defined in the java.io package as java.io.PrintWriter. Okay, let's look at some of the constructors for the PrintWriter class. So the first constructor is we have a PrintWriter, and we can pass in a file object. And so here the constructor creates a PrintWriter object with a specified file. And so this would not use any kind of automatic line flushing. And so if we want to look at a example of what this would look like, I could do new file writer and create a, I can create a file name, right? Pass in a file name as a string to create a file writer. Then I can pass the file writer into my PrintWriter. But I have a load of different constructors that PrintWriter will allow. So I could take PrintWriter, pass in as that first parameter a file, and then as a second parameter, a string that represents the character set. And so it would define the character set, say for instance, like UTF or whatever additional character sets you might want to try. We have another constructor where we pass in the file and we pass in the character set as a car set. And we saw an example of this in a prior video. We could also invoke the constructor using output stream, which is what this example was here, an output stream. We could also go ahead and create a constructor or invoke a constructor with an output stream, and as a second parameter, a Boolean value that represents the auto flush. So if auto flush is true, it's going to flush the writer every call we do print line. We also can pass in an output stream, and then as a second parameter, that Boolean value, whether we want to auto flush after each call to write or to print. And then as the third parameter, we can pass in the data type car set. which if we don't want to use the default character set, we can specify one. We also have a PrintWriter where we can pass in a writer, which I guess more technically, that's what this is, right? A writer. So we can pass in either a byte stream, a character stream, or a file. Again, there's a lot of constructors for PrintWriter. Here, we could also pass in a writer instance that has as its second parameter the Boolean value auto flush. So we can set auto flush to be true. We can also pass into our PrintWriter the string of a file name itself. So it'll go ahead and just open up that file for writing directly without having to create an output stream or a writer instance or a file instance. We can, if we pass in the string as a file name as a second parameter, pass in a second string if we don't want to use the default encoding, but if we want to specify some other encoding for our character set. And as opposed to a string defining the character set, we can also just pass in a Java object that represents the character set. And so just a quick note that if auto flush parameters defined in the above constructors, if that's set to true, then the output buffer is automatically flushed every time we call either println, printf, or format. Okay, so let's look at some of the methods for PrintWriter. In addition to the methods inherited from the writer class, PrintWriter also has some useful methods that are worth delving into. So let's take a look at those. There's a ton of them. So PrintWriter is a very verbose class. That's a great class for writing files, text files in particular, not byte files, not binary files, but if you're doing text, this is the class really to look into. So we have an append method where we can append a specified character to the PrintWriter. And so append is going to be overloaded. So it can take either a character or a character sequence, or we could do a character sequence and then as a second and third parameter, define where we in the character sequence we want to start and how many characters once we start we want to append. Okay, we have a check error that's going to return back a Boolean value. So check error flushes the stream, and if it's not closed and checks its error state. So if an exception has occurred while writing values to that stream, the check error will return true. Remember that PrintWriter does throw a IO exception. It just toggles an internal flag. So we can check that flag with that method. We can also clear the error. And so that's used to clear the error state of the stream. We have obviously a close method. So the method closes the stream and releases any system resources associated with it. And so just a special note, you must close the print stream when you're completed writing the output. If you exit the program without closing it, none of the contents will write to the file. And that's true all the time with all the other methods we've seen on being able to write. Okay, we have a flush method that's just going to flush our stream. We have a ton of print methods, right? So we can pass a Boolean value to print, a character array, a double value, a float, a integer value, a long value, and we can print objects. And if we do objects, then it's going to use the toString method on the object to represent it as text. We can pass a string into the print method. So all these, just go ahead and write whatever these values are that we're passing to the file. I also, in addition to the prints, I also have printlns, which is going to print whatever is passed into it, and then a new line after that. So I could either use println without any parameter, and I'll just print a new line into the file, or I can pass in any one of these primitive data types or reference types, right? So Boolean, a character array. And so if we do a character array, it's gonna print the array of characters, right? Similar to like what a string would be. A double, a float, an integer, a long. I pass in an object, in which case it'll invoke the toString method to print the object as a string, and then a line after that, and a string as well. I can also set errors. So this set error method is used to indicate that an error has occurred. And then we also have some write methods in addition to the print methods and the println methods. And so with write, we can take in, again, a number of parameters, either a character array or a character array with an offset and the number of characters we want to grab from that portion of the character array. We can just pass in a single character. We can pass in a string to write, or we can pass in a string with an offset into the string. Where in the string do we want to start writing from, and the length of characters we want to go ahead and write from. And then we also have a printf. And so printf, again, notice these are all the same. If effectively what system.out is, I think you're probably starting to recognize, is a PrintWriter, right? But it's a PrintWriter where its target is the monitor, your display, as opposed to a file. And so with printf, we can put a formatted string, and then we can have any number of objects that follow the formatted string that key into the values that are supposed to be formatted into this formatted string. And then also we have format, which is very similar. So it writes a formatted string to the writer using the specified format string. So printf, format, effectively the same things. Okay, let's look at some sample code with PrintWriter. So in this first example, we're going to write data to the console and to the file. So to illustrate, the PrintWriter is both something you can use for files, but it's also the instance that system.out references, right? So here we have our source code, and I will open that up in just a moment, IntelliJ. And here we have our results. Let's go to IntelliJ and actually look at our PrintWriter tester. Close these other things out. Okay, so inside of here, I'm going to create a file. I'm going to import file writer so that I can pass that to my PrintWriter. And again, PrintWriter is essentially going to be a wrapper class. So it requires some underlining class in order to operate. But what it does is it provides all those methods we saw to whatever writer we pass to it. We also are going to go ahead or byte stream too, right? We can pass either a byte stream or a character stream into PrintWriter, and then it gives us the ability to write text to whatever that stream is that we attach to it. So I'm going to create a class, PrintWriter tester1. I'm going to create a main method, throw the IO exception here to print to the console. I'm going to wrap the PrintWriter around system.out. So I'm going to create a new PrintWriter, and as a parameter, I'm going to pass in system.out and save PrintWriter there. Then I'm going to tell PrintWriter to write the string hello from the console. I'm going to flush the contents of my stream, and then I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to create a second PrintWriter, right? This time I'm going to create a PrintWriter around a file writer. And so my file writer is going to write to the destination of myfile.txt inside of the source directory, inside of IntelliJ here. And so then I'm going to call those same commands. Essentially, I'm going to tell my PrintWriter 2 to write hello from a file. I'm going to flush the contents of the stream, and I'm going to close it. So let me go ahead and run that. And so if I do that, we can see here inside my console, I see hello from the console that came from here, from this write. And so if I go to myfile.txt here, I can see hello from a file is right there. Excellent. And so pretty much that covers everything that I want to cover in terms of the PrintWriter. And that fundamentally concludes our kind of exploration into character streams and byte streams. So yeah, that's going to be the end of that discussion.